All right, I'm joined by our senior editor, Alex Sear, and our managing editor, Katelyn Tossi. Alex is in Toronto, Canada. I love saying Toronto, Canada. And
makes you sound like you're not from here.
It does indeed. It makes me sound like I'm American. And Katelyn, you're in the far off jungles of Costa Rica.
I wish you could see out my window. There's not a tree in sight, but that's okay. We'll pretend.
Alex and I always imagine that Katelyn's living like in some sort of lush forest when in fact you're just living in a city. You're in San Jose, Costa Rica.
I had you in a tree house.
Oh,
cool.
That would have been so cool. You know what? Let's just keep imagining that. That sounds a lot cooler than where I am right now.
Then just like crawl out of your treehouse at 5 o'clock in the morning, do your 2-hour run, come back, climb back up the tree, hang out, do a podcast.
Oh, you go down you've got like a rope. You go down you slide down a rope in your trail running kit. You go for a run, you evade some panthers, and then you come climb up your rope at the end.
You know,
feed your pet monkey.
Places. Oh my goodness, there are areas where I could find animals like that and make that come true. That's a really good retirement plan, guys.
Previous podcast, you did reference a black panther. So
yes, a black jaguar. Remember
a jaguar. Black jaguar.
That story will live on forever.
Crazy. I just realized, guys, that we've done I don't know, almost 30 podcasts, and I've never introduced myself in a single one. My name is Michael Doyle, and I am the editor-in-chief of Marathon Handbook. And I am located in an undisclosed location in a bunker somewhere, stroking my hairless cat as I pod. No, I'm in Toronto, Canada as well. All right. So we've got a packed show. We're going to talk about, this is the sibling podcast to last week's show, where Katelyn and I riffed on marathon goals, and this is the compendium. This is the appendix, the notes afterwards, because we started to tease this one out in the last show. This is all about the DNF, the did not finish. Did not finish. I got that one right? Do not finish. Right? I don't know if I've ever said did not finish out loud before. We're going to talk about DNFs, whether or not you should ever DNF, how to approach a DNF, or how to approach not DNFing, perhaps is a better way of saying it. We're just going to break down the DNF. We're gonna share our darkest moments in running, whether or not perhaps any of us have DNF'd in the past. Yikes! But first, let's talk a little bit about Alex's latest YouTube video, which I am in love with. Super fun, a narrative quest. Alex, you went and found, I think, probably the hottest Strava segment in Toronto. It's called, what's the official name of the segment?
It's called Cruisin' by Drake's Crib.
Amazing. Whoever titled that, chef's kiss. That's brilliant. So you went out and you decided you're gonna snipe the segment, and we're gonna film it and create like a little mini documentary of your quest. How did you discover the segment, and had you ever run past Drake's house before? I don't know if I ever have before.
No, I hadn't. And it's maybe the most popular segment that's not on a regular running route inside of Toronto. People have their common running routes. This is like in northeast Toronto, North Toronto, in a neighborhood called the Bridle Path. Like, you wouldn't just find yourself in the Bridle Path running. You're there either because you're super rich and you live there, or you're visiting. Like, a lot of tourists and even locals of Toronto will like make this an afternoon where they go and drive through this super rich neighborhood. Drake is in there. I think Celine Dion has a house there. Gordon Lightfoot has a house there. Mick Jagger rented a place there. So it's like the who's who of Toronto. It's like the Beverly Hills of Canada. So the segment in front of his house, I think, only became popular because of what it is. You just don't happen to be there. And I think there had been like 4,000 attempts of this, and it's a 750 meter straightaway that runs in front of his house. And I mean, his house, you can't see much of it from the street, but it is $100 million mansion. And if you peek through the gates, you can see how crazy it is. And I mean, if you've been following the Drake and Kendrick beef, you now know what his house looks like. Yeah. So I had the idea. I thought, okay, what's what would be a cool segment to get? And like, I don't hunt segments regularly. So anyway, I dragged our videographer. I truly do not. I truly do not.
Alex,
so
a segment sniper.
Caitlin just followed me on Strava, so she'll know if I'm telling the truth.
I will.
Yeah.
I'm going to check it out.
Yeah. So no, it's good. I took our videographer Kosuke and I drove there. I did a whole warm up. He came with me on the bike and then documented and it was like, I went hard at it because I wanted to get the segment, not just get it, but get it in a way that other people can't snipe it from me right away. And I still have it, I think, a week later. So I'm hoping people watch the video and then, take it.
Because you ran ridiculously fast. Like, how do you even get to that speed? Guys, you have to check out the segment and see how fast our Alex here is.
Yeah. I won't spoil it here. And I mean, I say this in the video, like it's in the video. There's road fast and there's track fast. I'll be honest, I surprised myself with how quickly I did it because I'm more so in base phase, and seeing these numbers on my watch, I thought, hey, you know what? This is not bad. But if you're coming from a track and field background, you'll look at that time and you'll say, yeah, I've done this in an interval. So it depends. I think to marathoners, it's impressive. To an 800-meter runner, it's pretty pedestrian.
Well, I'm glad that your coach gave you permission to go ahead and do that.
He didn't. Yeah.
Oh.
He
didn't get the cosign beforehand?
Of course he did.
No. He did retroactively. I mean, to his credit, I was late to ask him. I think I sent a message at like 11 p.m. the night before saying, hey, by the way, I'm going to do this thing. And the next day he answered and he said, oh, you know what? Okay, that's fun. I did have something similar planned, like some longer strides inside it. So I didn't completely botch what the daily plan was. But
okay.
Oh, this was like 8 to 10 longer strides glued together.
Put together.
Turned into an 800-meter run. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
And that'd be an interesting thing to put together, which would be like like a listicle of like the 10 most either popular or interesting or fun Strava segments around the world, like sightseeing style Strava segments. Like obviously Drake's house is a total curiosity. Like it was featured in Architectural Digest famously as a cover story a couple of years ago. He allowed the editors and a photographer into his house, and you can find those pictures everywhere. Like it's a super gaudy, some would say tacky, but definitely very fancy house. So in a very fancy neighborhood. I don't think I've run up around there. I'm not sure if I've ever run by his house before. I certainly have not ever gone after a segment there before. But yeah, that's definitely worth checking out, Alex. You guys did an amazing job. It's super fun to watch.
Yeah, very fun.
Are you going to go after any other Strava segments? Are you going to be like a dickhead to anybody else in the near future? And
No. A slight peek into my training. It's actually getting to the point where I feel serious about it. The weeks are getting bigger. The workouts are getting faster. I'm not looking to dabble with and to risk anything crazy. So I think I'm going to be a little bit more conservative until the racing season.
Yeah, it's one of the weird things about Strava and running. It's like, I think with cycling, sure, you can attack a segment on a random Tuesday afternoon on a ride. But like, if you're going out for a quote unquote easy run and then you're like, your watch tells you, hey, you're going by the cruising by Drake's crib segment. Why don't you give this a shot for 800 meters? It's just a really weird thing to do, especially if you're training for a goal, right? Mm-hmm. So not a good way to set yourself up for success, but definitely for injury, I would say. Yeah. So check out Alex's YouTube video. It is on our channel right now. And I think you'll be doing more of this kind of stuff in the near future. I think that was a super fun thing to watch. So one more thing before we jump into the big topic of the week. New York City Marathon. It happens in November, and they just dropped their elite field yesterday. So we're recording this on Wednesday. Our pod goes out on Thursday morning. So we've got a story up now on our site breaking down the elite field. And I just thought it would be fun to kind of nerd out for a quick second, because this ties in really nicely to our chats about the Olympic marathons, which we did on 2 previous emergency instant reaction pods when the games were going on. Surprising names in this elite field, considering the Olympics just happened. I don't know. I guess November is a long ways away, but like, do you guys take a look at this field at all?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. It seems like a who's who of people who didn't quite. Well, actually, I shouldn't say that. It's not even a who's who of people who didn't deliver at the Olympics. A part of it is that, but you also have the men's champion Tamarat Tola doubling back in racing New York. So it's a huge overlap, don't you think?
Yeah, I'm a little surprised. I'm a little surprised to see so many names. I don't know if Michael, you're going to reveal more who are running, but to have so many names from the Olympics. I mean, I feel like they just ran. Maybe I'm a really conservative coach and a conservative competitor, but I would feel a little leery about, giving it my all in the marathon at the Olympics and then a few months later heading to New York. But I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like Katelyn, like none of these runners have ever listened to our coaching focused podcasts before, because you would not recommend they do what they're about to do. Although I'm thinking here, like, I guess if you're an American and you ran the U.S. Olympic marathon trials in March in Orlando to qualify for the Olympics, which you had to do, then you ran the Olympics and finished the Olympic marathon just this past couple of weeks in August, and now you're going to triple down and go after New York City. Man, I hope you're getting paid nicely by the New York City Roadrunners to show up and run this race. Because that's 3 marathons in 1 year. That's hard on your body.
That's hard on the body. Totally.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Now that I agree, but also now that you say that, I feel like I think I know why people are doing this marathon. The Americans, but also athletes of other countries, when you think about it, have spent the whole year either trying to qualify for an Olympic race or race the Olympic marathon. No one's been going for time so much this year because they didn't have the chance. I think this is what's happening. A lot of these athletes are finding themselves in really good shape and are thinking, maybe I have a 201, 202 in my legs if I'm a man, and a 213 or what would Asefa run in the fall if she's fit, or 208? Like, but you know what I mean? This might just be a chance to run a really good time. And so that's what's appealing for them. No one ran quickly at the Olympics. They don't have a 203 or 204 to put on their resume. So maybe this is their shot.
Although New York City Marathon's probably not the greatest place to try that, but other flatter courses in perhaps November. I'm trying to think of something that would go on in November that would fit the bill. Not for an international elite field. All those, like Chicago is in October, Amsterdam's in October. Those are flat, fast courses. Nothing in November. Like Valencia will be stacked. Probably.
Valencia.
So, basically, you could do an inverse. Look at this list, go read our story on our site, and you could basically, like, any name that comes to mind of a super fast runner that is not on this list, probably you'll see them in Valencia, which is in December. And I believe this year has this like massive payday. I think they're throwing down $1 million, if I'm not mistaken, for the winners of the race.
That's amazing.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Got to fact check that, but I'm pretty sure they've dangled a legit prize purse that's way higher than anything that's come out before in running. So I feel like I've buried the lead here, but some names that you can see in New York racing. Evans Chibet, who did not run famously, I guess, infamously, was not selected for the Kenyan Olympic team. In retrospect, maybe there's a guy that shouldn't have been selected, and maybe Evans Chibet should have been selected. Hot take. Speaking of DNFs, we'll talk about that down the road in this pod. So Evans Chibet, he's a 203 guy. He's won Boston in the past, and he's racing in New York. Gabriel Guillet, who raced in the Olympics but DNF'd. He is also racing Bashir Abdi, coming off his silver medal. The Belgian runner, he coming off the silver medal in the Paris Games. He's racing Tamarat Tola, our boy, the champ, Mr. Gold Medal. He's bringing his gold. I wonder if he's good. This would be the very first question I would ask if I were in New York City, which I will be, covering the race. If I'm at the press conference, which I hope to be, I'll ask Tamarat Tola, you got your gold medal in the suitcase? Can we see it? Can you take it out? Can you show it to us?
He should be wearing it around his neck at the press conference.
I feel like you should like be mandated to wear your gold medal for 365. You just like,
absolutely,
or like the remainder of the year, the Olympic year, you should just wear it. You should wake up, put the gold medal. It's like putting on a watch. You got to put on the gold medal and wear it around.
It's part of every day. Yep.
It's part of the look. So Jeffrey Kamworor, who has won New York in the past. He's racing Abdi Nagier from the Netherlands, who also raced in the Olympics and DNF'd racing. And now I'm going to scroll. Oh, and 2 Americans, Connor Mantz, Clayton Young, 8th and 9th in the Olympic marathon. New York Roadrunners just must have got the checkbook out and been like, let's make you an offer you can't refuse. So you both show up, because they're good. They're good for the, I think they're good for American media attention, and who knows what they can do in New York. Good pull by New York Roadrunners to get them in. On the women's side, Sheila Curie. Apologies to Sheila, 217 runner. She didn't run the Olympics. She's coming. Turnish Dababa, one of the goats of distance running. She's now 38. She is coming and running New York. Vivian Chariot. Down the list here, Edna Kiplagat, our queen of the Masters division, Katelyn, our patron saint of 40 plus.
Nice.
She's racing.
Represent.
Eunice Chumba, who raced in the Olympics, came top 10. Helen Obiri, reigning champion in New York, will be back, as will Des Linden. Sharon Laketti, who's won New York before, she raced in the Olympics, came in 4th. Wow. So I mean, wow. Dakota Lindworm, she's racing as well. Jess McLean, we talked about her a little bit. She was the alternate. She's also racing New York.
Okay.
Man, I feel like she's got some serious ammo to run well in New York.
She's going to be fired up.
Yeah, that'd be cool to watch. So New York, crazy. Well done. Kudos to New York. You did it. You put together an awesome field. It's going to be super fun to watch. Hopefully the afterglow of the Olympic marathons will shine brightly on the New York City Marathon and Chicago and Berlin as well. We talked about this before the pod. I think we're going to do some instant reaction pods after every single marathon coming up this fall. We'll hit Berlin, Chicago, New York, and do a little chat about what went down in each one of those major marathons. All right, guys.
Awesome.
Let's turn and burn. Let's get right into it here. Main topic of the day, the DNF. One of the, I wish we had a sound effect. I might throw in the gasp or scream sound effect here in post. The DNF, the dreaded
DNF. Oh, jinx.
We're gonna talk. Jinx. My 6-year-old is really into the jinx right now. We're gonna talk DNFs. We're gonna talk about what it is, whether or not you should ever consider a DNF, when it's acceptable to even let it enter your mind, when not to DNF, strategies we use and Katelyn, you use as a coach to help your athletes work through wrestling with the idea of the DNF.
Yep. And
our own personal haunting tales.
Oh, that's going to be I don't know if it's going to be a fun one or a tough one or a sad one. We're going to find out.
or a little bit of everything. All right. First things first. Who wants to take the Merriam-Webster's definition of the DNF? Katelyn, I feel like Coach Katelyn can take this on. Just define the obvious. What is a DNF?
Okay, DNF is that horrible 3 letters you see next to your name if you begin a race and you do not finish a race, and you end up being at the end of that list because you had to step off at some point, whether it's the beginning, the middle, or the end. So you basically did not finish a race, and that's going to show up on the finish list, which is just a nightmare. I don't know. I think I have some really strong feelings about DNFing, as you can see. So the nightmare DNF. So it just basically means you didn't get to finish a race for one reason or another, which we're going to get into in lots of detail.
Okay. So we mentioned before when we were just chatting about the Paris Olympic Marathon as the most recent example of a major international elite race where there were a good number of DNFs, both in the women's and the men's field. So just as an example for our listeners and viewers to digest this, I think in elite races you see quite a few DNFs for different reasons, which we'll talk about later, but just as a couple of examples. So in the Olympic marathons, in the men's race, 10 men DNF'd. In the women's race, 11 women DNF'd. The field was about, I'd say 90 in total for both. So you're looking at about a 12% dropout rate in both those races, which
Seems like
I
a lot
haven't,
to me.
that sounds like a lot actually.
Yeah,
Although
it's a
it's
lot.
a summer marathon, it was a very hilly marathon.
Yep.
In some cases, if you're not going to medal and you're one of the top entrants, you're the voice in your head of like, go for the payday in the fall sort of gets louder and louder as the race gets longer and more painful. And we'll talk about that in more
Yep.
detail, like the when to DNF, for our elite listeners that need our advice as hack recreational runners. So perhaps one of the most legendary DNFs now in the history of distance running. I was thinking about this. It was like, what are some famous DNFs? Eliud Kipchoge at the Paris Olympic Marathon will go down in history probably as, sorry, dude, like probably the most famous DNF ever now, which is a crazy thing to think about. I struggled to think about a bigger DNF in distance running history. And he's probably up at the top. And the women's race, Fiona O'Keefe. I mean, not nearly as famous a scenario as Kipchoge stepping off the course in an Olympic marathon, but the American Fiona O'Keefe, which I think she DNF'd for, I'd say, a very good reason, because she was clearly very injured. And we can talk about that when we talk about reasons to DNF. As a counterpoint, the UK's Rose Harvey, we wrote a story about this. Our news editor, Jesse, wrote a news story wrote sort of an opinion piece actually about why we shouldn't necessarily celebrate Rose Harvey's performance, because she struggled through 78th place out of 80 finishers in a 2:51, which was like almost 30 minutes slower than her qualification time for the Olympics, and then revealed afterwards that she had a fractured femur.
Yeah.
The big bone in your leg, and ran through it in excruciating pain and knew very early on that something was very, very wrong and decided to finish anyway. And I think the kind of bad old mentality of sports journalism and celebrating toughness and the warrior mentality kind of came through. And there were some pieces about like, isn't this awesome that she got this done and finished the Olympic marathon? That's part of the Olympic spirit. And I'm like, we can talk about this when you talk about when to consider DNFing. And in fact, let's roll into that.
Yeah.
So when to consider the DNF. What are the circumstances that should lead to your decision to opt out of a race? Like, let's talk this through. Let's try to be fair and reasonable, because I don't know about you guys, but I think everybody has it roll around in their mind at some point, particularly in a more excruciating effort at any level, any ability level. Like, man, wouldn't it just be easier to like step off the course and not finish this right now?
I think it makes the most sense. Like, I think pain is maybe the only true reason why someone should DNF a race. I get there's an argument for not feeling that well. We mentioned the payday. If you're a professional runner, if you're running for money, which is what, the 0.1% of us,
less.
It'll make a bit of sense when you think, okay, maybe this one won't work out. There's a better race in 3 weeks. I'll do that. Even that line of thinking gets dangerous, I think, if you have that race in the back pocket. To me, pain is the only thing that should get you away from a race. Michael, you say that old thinking from sports journalism. It is old thinking from sports journalists and sports lore, but there's also a new version of that type of thinking. I think for that I'll blame Dave Goggins and his weird stuff. It's like it's romanticizing doing hard things. But the devil in it is you need to know which hard things are worth doing and which hard things are just stupid. And running through a stress fracture is dumb. Like don't do it. And to complicate things, sometimes it's hard to know if the pain that you're feeling is a pain that you can push through, and if or if it's something that you can't. And I mean, we've all been running for years. I'm sure we all still struggle with that when you feel a little niggle in your leg and wonder, is this going to blow out on me in the next kilometer? Right. Should I stop right now? Or is this a little bit more in my head, and will this go away when my muscles warm up? Very hard thing to do. But I think the rule of thumb is if you're racing and your pain is getting worse and worse and worse, and it's altering your gait, well, then you're doing more harm than good. At that point, then it's worth considering.
Right. And I completely agree, Alex. And I think that most of us are on the same wavelength here about, when to DNF and when not to DNF, which we'll get into more. But I mean, to me, it's also just that serious pain. And the only other thing that I would mention, other than an injury or on the road to an injury and knowing it, is, and I think this comes from trail running, is if there's some sort of really dangerous conditions to where you can't continue. Like I feel once in a while in some races down here, there have been people who, like in Costa Rica, who will get, heat stroke or something, like to the point where there's so much heat and humidity where you basically, I think in that case, you basically get pulled off when you, get heat stroke and stuff. You end up, delirious and with a lot of issues that I think really adverse weather conditions, thunder and lightning, that maybe they're going to even cancel a race, but something that is completely out of your control that makes the situation dangerous for you, I think could be something else. But I think maybe that comes up a little bit more in trail running, or for example, if you're running at night on a very treacherous course and your headlamp stops working, and you don't have any way to finish this race, and you don't have a backup, and you don't have other people around you, and you have to, somehow get to the next aid station with some help, and you have to say, okay, I don't have the equipment to do another 8 hours through the night. What do I do? But I mean, these are really extenuating circumstances, but they do come up in trail running where you may have some other reason other than that pain. But that's a pretty, risk condition. So I would say it's mostly, pain and injury.
So like if you put it under an umbrella, it's like if you honestly suspect serious harm,
right,
you should drop out.
Yeah, we can create like a flow chart where it's like one is like actual tiger on the course or lightning striking in front of you.
Right.
And then the other is just wishing that there was a tiger let loose in the New York City area at that time. And it's a sunny day. Yeah. Yeah. No, I think that's sort of we can hammer home this right now where it's like acute pain or serious danger to your safety,
right?
Which you would like to think that the race itself would somehow, like I know that major marathons, for example, have like a warning system, and they have it up. I think it's at like every mile or kilometer marker. They'll have like a warning system where like basically if you enter into the red or the black or whatever they call, like the worst level, like if it's 30 degrees Celsius, 100 degrees, 95 degrees out, and it's too dangerous to continue running the race, they'll shut it down. I mean, there is actually protocols in place. So you can kind of trust a lot of races, hopefully, to implement that. But otherwise, yeah, use your own judgment. But I think the main one that we're talking about here today for most people in most circumstances is it, what's the voice in your head? Is the voice in your head, man, I wish this pain was more acute so that I had a reason to stop? Yep. Or is the voice in your head, something is wrong, every step I take is dangerous for my body, yep, and I'm feeling sharp pain? I had a physiotherapist once describe to me that there's sort of two different genres of pain. There's dull pain and sharp pain. Sharp pain means you should not run on it. Dull pain means you should exercise caution, but you might be able to continue. So I think that's a good way of evaluating it. Is it a sharp pain? Another kind of rule of thumb I have in the back of my mind is if there is pain, I then ask myself, or I tell myself, if I'm stepping off the course now, I will need to take significant time to recover. So this means it's going to be a backup race in a week. This means I'm taking the rest of the season off, or I'm taking, or if it's a mid-season tune-up race or whatever, I have to take a month off. I have to take 4 weeks off to let this injury recover. And I think that's a very sobering moment as a runner. You're like, okay, how serious am I going to take this in the aftermath of this? That's like kind of like a being honest with yourself moment. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about when not to DNF, which kind of feels
other reason. No.
Yeah, kind of feels like it's like pretty much always, with the exception of extreme pain, which you have to leave at your own judgment. But I think we know. I think in our heart of hearts, we always know when like something's very dangerous that's happening to our body. So how do we know when not to DNF? Let's talk this one out here. I think it's basically like, now we're going to create a toolkit for our listeners as to how to work through not to DNF effectively, right? So yeah. I think you start by assessing the situation. You start by asking yourself some tough, honest questions.
Yeah, I think that, thinking about when to DNF sometimes, or a lot of time, it can just be the easy way out. You don't DNF just because the race isn't going your way. I mean, this is a great segue we had last week with our goals and our marathon goal podcast, where we talked about the A, B, and C goal. And the A, B, and C goals are for these situations where you say, okay, the race isn't going my way. Well, if I'm not going to get my time that I'm expected to get, or that I'm expecting myself to get, then I'm just going to walk off and I'm going to try again some other time because I'm not going to get my time. To me, that's really not the attitude to have. Like, as a coach and as a competitor, as a runner, I've always been, A goal, no, we're going to the B goal. Like, I'm going to finish this race. If I'm physically well, I'm going to finish this race. I'm just not up to speed today. There are some factors, which we're going to talk about later, maybe some factors that we could have ended up controlling, that, just didn't go my way. And so I'm not going to get the time I want. So I'm going to step off the course. That's not a reason. That's not a reason to DNF. You have to assess the situation, change your goals, think about a plan B, a plan C, a plan D, as Michael said last week, a plan E, a plan F. That's there to be able to take care of those mental struggles that you have, or just kind of giving up, right? So I don't think giving up is a reason to DNF. That's a reason why you just have to push on and work on your mental strategies to be able to get through those low moments.
I have another one, and this is what I used to struggle with when I had my streak of DNFs about 10 years ago, and we'll get into that later. But it was less so a discouragement about the present and more so like a fear for the immediate future of, like, say you're racing a 10K and you're at 6K and it's already hurting. You start telling yourself, my God, if it feels so bad now, imagine how hard it's going to be at 8K. How much are my quads going to burn at 8K and then 9K? And can I finish this? Oh boy, I don't know. That is such a bad reason to DNF, because you are setting a precedent for yourself for future races, because it's a thought pattern. Mm-hmm. To me, the toughest part of the race is like just past halfway when things hurt, but you still have a long way to go. It's not the last 500 meters or the last kilometer, even though that is the hardest because you see the end. Midway through, 3/4 of the way through, you might not see the end, and that's the hardest part. And so I think for a while, my problem was giving into those negative thoughts at that point of the race. And newsflash, you're going to get to that point in every single race. So if you can't override those thoughts, you'll keep having them. One thing that's helped me through it and like helped me get rid of the DNF thing is I keep thinking of my one most painful race ever. It happened to be Ottawa race weekend 10K in 2015. It's a race in Canada that happens in May, and it's at the end of May. So it's one of the like hotter weekends of the spring in Canada. So having come through a long Canadian winter, we're not used to like 22 to 25 degree weather. The race happens at night. So it's like at 6 p.m., I guess, evening. We're not used to that type of heat yet. So everyone suffers, and few people PB there every year because it just so happens to always be hot that day. Anyway, I was racing at 10K and went about was swimming in lactate at 5 kilometers, which shouldn't happen over 10K.
That's awful. That's awful early to go for the
Yeah.
lactate pool swim.
It felt like I was racing at 1500 and I had 5 kilometers to go. And I was like, oh my God.
Good times.
And you know what? I credit my 2015 self because I pushed through it and I finished the race. And since then, every race that I do, once I start to hurt, I tell myself, you're hurting, but it's not as bad as Ottawa race weekend of 2015. And you made it through that, so you could make it through this. So don't worry about how much it'll hurt 2K down the road or near the finish. Keep going. So there's that fear about there's that discouragement right away of, oh, my time's not going to be good. But there's also that fear ahead. Those are the two dragons as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, I want to tackle the, oh, my time's not going to be good piece of this, because this is something that is a huge element in this. I think, I'm sure if you did like a deep analysis, an honest exit survey of every DNF and every major distance running event in the world for a certain amount of time, you'd capture the following information, which is the overwhelming number of people stepped off the course because they were not going to hit their outcome-based goal, their A goal, their big fat number. We talked about last week, Katelyn, the what I have dubbed the sub trap, sub 4 hours, sub 3 hours, sub 240, sub 230, whatever it is. The number-based goal, the ego goal, right? And you're not gonna satisfy your ego. You're not gonna do the thing that you feel like is defining you in that moment as a runner. So you're hiding from it. You're stepping off so that it won't exist one way or another. So you can't, and you're a weird little world of thinking that people care about what you're doing as a runner. They can't criticize you. You can't criticize yourself. Like, you're negating the existence of the thing or of the failure of the thing. And I think that plays into something called perfectionist syndrome, which is a very real psychological hang up or syndrome, challenge, disorder, I guess, if it's very extreme. And it seems to make a lot of sense when it comes to DNFing, because I think when you look at it, did a little research, guys, did a little exploring the Psychology Today website,
Nice.
thinking about this, because this to me is it's a familiar thing. It's something I've not struggled with running, because I have a very, I guess, different relationship to how I go about running and distance running and the marathon in particular than other things in life. But perfectionist syndrome, it's basically, I like this description here. Perfectionism is not about striving for excellence, but striving for the impossible, the unattainable, and ultimately the unachievable. Signs of perfectionism include negative self-talk. Sounds like in a race when things are not going well and you're trying to talk yourself into stepping off the course, comparing yourself to others, spending excessive time trying to achieve personal goals, which sounds like runners. Yeah. It's like, oh God,
runners
guys.
in general. Oh
yeah.
God, we're all
So signs of perfectionist syndrome: self-criticism, holding yourself to a different standard, self-worth based on achievements and performance, comparing yourself to others constantly, being a procrastinator, excessive time spent achieving your goals, thinking you're not good enough, and the all or nothing approach to the endeavor. I mean, that's basically
deeply worried about myself. I think I could tick about 80% of those boxes.
Yeah.
We're entering into like group therapy here. No, I think that it's just like, I think running attracts the A-type personality, and a lot of A-type people fall prey to perfectionist syndrome. And I think that when you're DNFing, and particularly when you go on a streak of DNFs, I think what's happening is you're falling into this valley of perfectionism where you're thinking about the outcome too much. You're thinking about BQ or bust. You're thinking about, I got to crack 4 hours in the marathon because that means I'm a real runner, or I got to break 3 hours in the marathon because that's some sort of like stamp that proves that I'm, not mediocre or whatever. Right. And instead of thinking about the process, thinking about what I think and what we should probably talk about here, which is like a healthier way to have a relationship with this sport and this lifestyle and this activity, which I think would help people through wrestling with the DNF alligator at 30K in a marathon. Yeah. So having those A, Bs, and C goals are really important, I would say, Katelyn. I would say you nailed it. And being able to fluidly move off the A goal, the outcome-based goal, this race is about me qualifying for Boston. This race is about me running under 3 hours and 30 minutes or whatever in the marathon, or 20 minutes in the 5K, or whatever the stupid number is, and moving to the B goal, which is thinking more about every run being a learning experience, every run having its challenges, and a success being working through those challenges. Have you guys ever run a perfect race before? Because I haven't. I've never run a perfect race. I don't know what it's like. You have?
Yeah, most races. Yeah, no, I'm kidding.
It's like, Alex, I have to edit this out.
Yeah. No, I have run a perfect race, and I remember it just because it was so uncommon. Actually, it was again 2015. I learned a lot in 2015. It was a 1,500 meter. It was a big year. It probably coincided with I was getting older. I think I turned 20 that year. So that's a year of pretty big development for a runner, going from teen to adult runner, I guess. But it was a 1,500, and I smashed my PB by nearly 15 seconds, and just everything worked out perfectly. And I remember it because it's so uncommon. And then you chase that perfect race, and in the realm of 1500s marathon, doesn't matter, but in the 15, it was your first lap has to be good. You need a hard kick at the end. You can't fall asleep in the second lap. There's like a laundry list of things that you need to nail, and whether that's a 10K, a marathon, well, then the list just gets longer. So it's very, very rare to do. And can I add one thing about this this perfectionist thinking? I actually think it's really interesting. It's something I probably carry with me in areas outside of running. The perfectionist thinking, I'm no psychologist, but the perfectionist thinking, I think, does not start and end in the race. It's a thing I think you carry for weeks inside of a season. I'm talking from personal anecdote. Sometimes I enter seasons feeling like an underdog because I've been injured for a while or whatever reason. Sometimes I enter a season thinking I'm the big dog. I'm going to go and win whichever race I'm going into. I'm in the best shape of my life. This is my turn to absolutely nail it. And I realized that when I enter the season as the big dog, there's less room for error in my head. And this is weeks before. I need to nail all of my workouts. I need to sleep perfectly. I need my easy runs to feel good. I need my nutrition to be perfect so that when I get to the race, my margin for error is tiny. And I actually find that I end up racing better in the seasons where I feel like an underdog myself. Because it's like, if you screw up, it's fine. It's okay. And so I'm just more relaxed, and I don't have that thinking. If I'm midway through my race and I'm a little bit slower than pace, it's fine. I wasn't expecting to absolutely kill it anyway. And then maybe a negative split, right?
That might be why, you hear these like post-game interviews with the greats in any sport, Tom Brady famously, Michael Jordan as well, Simone Biles most recently. These are people who are absolutely at the apex of their sport, the greatest of all time in their respective sport. And yet somehow it's almost infuriating when you're watching as a mere mortal and you're watching the post-game interview and they're just like, no one believed in me, the Sha'Carri Richardson, like everyone's my enemy kind of. It's like everyone's a huge fan and everyone thinks you're the greatest at this. What are you talking about? This is madness, what you're saying. However, maybe that makes sense in that this is perhaps a trait of a high level athlete performing who is able to psychologically prepare themselves perfectly because they're able to create these conditions, whether they're completely fictional and, in their own mind or not, to like lower the pressure and create the scenario where they are going to potentially excel and achieve something by like BSing themselves into thinking that like, like that the pressure is off basically, and so they're rising to the occasion, not already at the complete ceiling of what they're doing.
Well, yeah, because the alternative is horrible. Like if you're Michael Jordan mid-career, you can't lose anymore if you're not creating those conditions for yourself. If you're not making yourself the underdog, there's no other possibility than just thinking yourself into a corner, knowing that you're the best and you can't lose.
You're just absolutely expected. You're expected to win all the time, and that pressure has to be insane. I mean, I think no one ever, Alex has had a perfect race. I've had a couple of really awesome races, but I think that the best races I have is when I am able to take the pressure off myself. When I start pressuring myself for a race and I say, I want to win this, I want to podium this, I want to do this time, I want to get in this place, when I start pressuring myself pre-race, the nerves and the anxiety just absolutely kill me, and I don't feel good during the race. I'm not happy during the race. I'm not having a good time, and I am definitely not performing at my best. When I take the pressure off and I say, okay, I'm just going to go into this race. I'm going to, I lie to myself and I say, I'm not competitive. I'm just going to go in and have a good time. I'm just going to have
Sandbagger.
fun. Yeah, I'm just going to have so much fun. Those are the best races I've ever had, when I go in and I take the pressure off. But that's a really hard thing to do.
Well, it's a balance to strike too, right? Because I've also had the opposite happen. Enter a race completely unprepared, thinking, you know what, I don't care about it, so maybe it'll be just fine. And then you realize you just didn't prepare and you're not fit and it's not a good time. That's another recipe for a DNF. So there is a balance to strike too, right?
Yeah.
I think I have a good recommendation on how to set up that scenario, create those conditions for yourself to have success in every race. I'm setting myself up here.
Wow. Okay.
It's like pressure's on here. And to not DNF. And here we go. So I went for a run. This is just exquisite timing. I went for a run with an old training partner of mine who now lives in New Zealand. This guy, Chris Mihak. Shout out to Chris if he's listening. And he is in New Zealand because he is a coach for the New Zealand national kayak team, the Olympic program. And he coaches the women's group in New Zealand, and they just went to the Paris Olympics and swept the gold medal. All three events, kayaking events, they swept all three in gold. And I was sort of asking him, I'm like, and he's a very, very cerebral thinker. And for him, it's all about working with his athletes to have them prepared for the moment. And I asked him what the strategy was going into the games. And part of the challenge was one of their athletes, Lisa Carrington, who is she's the GOAT of sprint kayaking. And she's like literally like the Tom Brady or Michael Jordan of women's kayaking. Like she's just multi-gold medal. Like I think she's Dame Lisa Carrington. So she's even got like a royal moniker. She's so good. So how do you prepare these athletes? He's like, we didn't talk about gold medals. We didn't talk about the outcome. We weren't interested in podium, position, place. We talked about process. And he was like, so my message to the athletes was going into it, our meetings were, what is your race? How do you define what, their team's race is? How do they describe how they perform? And they had this like list. They're like, okay, we like to start strong. We like to hit a certain, like time, like an in-race time goal of the first 200 meters of the race. They want to hit a certain time to establish themselves. And then they want to get into their groove and hit a certain, for them, it's stroke rate. For a runner, it would be like, it's the equivalent would be like cadence. And like, basically he described it as like, we kind of block out everyone else in the course and ignore what the outcome is going to be. And our goal was to perform, to in our case would be like run your own race, like the cliche, like define what your race is for yourself and execute on that. And then everything else falls into place. And so in their case, interestingly, in the 4-woman race, they got out to their start, they hit their stroke rate, and then the Germans jumped out in front of them because the Germans were reacting to them because the Germans were driven by the outcome. They were like panicking and they're like, oh, we need to get ahead. And if you've watched an 800-meter track event, on running event, very similar scenario where first lap and then second lap you basically hang on for dear life. No one negative splits the second half of the 100. This race is the same way in the kayaking. And so basically what happens is the Germans react, they try to push ahead, but it's too early in the race. They burn themselves out. The New Zealanders, they stick to their plan and they paddle this perfect, consistent race. They paddled their own race. I don't know how you say that. They paddled stroke.
That works.
Yes, they paddled their own. They stuck to their race plan and they won in the end. And they didn't panic when someone else was ahead of them because they were doing their own thing. I think the takeaway from that is for any one of us, recreational runner, elite runner, it doesn't matter. Come up with a process for yourself for the race. Think about what you want to achieve in the race beyond just like a big fat number or a finishing place or whatever, or a qualifying for Boston or whatever. Think about the things you want to execute in your race and stick to your plan. And that way, and that can kind of almost be like a bee or a seagull too, right? You're like, okay, I want to make sure I stick to like my plan of running the first half at this pace. I want to make sure I get my nutrition in, my hydration in at these stations. I want to make sure I feel calm and confident and get like my heart rate sort of settled. Like all these little things, if you can create like a strategy for your race that is about all this process stuff, you'll just find yourself at the end of the race having success. And you'll be like, okay, now I'm at the last kilometer of the race, mile of the race, and I want to accelerate and leave nothing, out. I want to leave it all out on the course.
And I think, Michael, that's an amazing piece of advice for all of our listeners and all of our runners in general. And I think that this perfectly walks us into like, what can I do? Like all these process goals perfectly walks us into what can I do to try to avoid the DNF? So you just mentioned a bunch of things that you work on that are process goals that you can do to try to avoid the DNF. So like Michael said, okay, I'm going to hit my hydration. I'm going to get my nutrition just on point. My race strategy is going to be perfect because what's one of the reasons people end up bonking and some end up DNFing? Because they feel terrible. They hit the wall because at mile 30, they didn't take their gels. They just forgot, or they didn't do a good timing with it, or they didn't eat enough, or they didn't get the carbs they were planning on getting. That's a huge reason for people bonking in marathons. So, how can I avoid a DNF from completely wasting myself at mile 20, at kilometer 30, and just having no energy? I'm going to practice that fueling and hydration strategy, and I'm going to get it perfect. Okay. So what else am I going to do? Well, I'm going to make sure as well I don't use anything new at a race. So my practice in my longest long run, I'm going to make sure, my sneakers are perfect. My socks are perfect. I don't get any blisters. I'm not going to get any hot spots, because at least in trail running, if your feet are trashed at a certain point, you may not be able to continue. Like if your feet get to the point and, you're running 100-miler, we're always jumping from 5K, 10K marathon, ultra running. And I'm always that little ultra running voice that but it could affect you in a marathon as well, of course. And the bottom of your feet are just covered in blisters and hot spots because you forgot to put on your diaper cream, or you forgot to wear, that's one of my hacks.
Whoa.
Yeah. And
Alex is taking notes here. Diaper
cream.
I never bought cream or diapers. Okay.
Oh, okay. That's a good one. That's for a whole nother podcast to have foot care. So, having your feet killing you and those blisters, you just can't go on, or it's going to completely change your gait, like Alex mentioned, or it's going to change your pace. All of these things for you to practice, it's control the controllable. And that will and that will lower your chances of DNFing in any race. So, we could go on for hours about this, make sure you train well, make sure you're consistent, make sure you, sleep well, make sure you eat well. I mean, there's just so many things that go into preparing yourself. Make sure you know the weather, the terrain of your race. What's it going to be like that day? Wear the correct clothes. I will never forget in my second marathon, or was it my first marathon in Houston? It was 30 degrees, 0 degrees Celsius. I was in shorts and a tank top. I had these gloves on that were not sufficient. I couldn't open my nutrition. My hands were so frozen. I could not manipulate the gels out of the flip belt. I couldn't get, and of course I wasn't going to stop, right? This is immature Katelyn so many years ago. Couldn't get the gels out. And I just said, well, I guess I'm going to run the marathon without gels. Well, guess what happened at kilometer 25? It's just bonk, like complete bonk. So I said, I could have absolutely controlled that situation. Shame on me for not wearing the right clothes, for not preparing myself for that weather, thinking that I could just, it's going to feel great. This nice, cold, crisp air. I didn't think that my toes and my hands were going to be completely frozen because I wore the incorrect gear. So like all of those things, I've learned so many lessons over the years with all of my mistakes that, which is, I think that's, why we're able to give all this information to all of our listeners, because we've made all the mistakes and we're trying to help you not make them. So like we said, control the uncontrollable, control the controllable. You can't control the uncontrollable.
But if you can control the uncontrollable, my God, by all means.
Go for it.
Oh man, I wish. Yeah, that would be literally a superpower.
Yep.
Yeah, I think that it's a cliche, obviously, to say do everything and use the training as the grounds for practice, but really that is kind of the way you can avoid the dreaded DNF is by taking some time throughout the training process to think about what you're going to do in the race, because that's why you're doing all this training for most people. And although, I love training as well, so the training itself is enjoyable. If you're somebody who likes the process, but take advantage of the fact that you've got all this time to practice this stuff. So just think about these various outcomes. And I promise you, every single distance running event is going to have a rough patch, especially the marathon. And the longer the distance is, the more opportunities there are for challenges along the way. And you need to start thinking about the fact that you're going to go through dark moments in these distance running events. So prep yourself for it. And how are you going to handle a panic? How are you going to handle a blister on the bottom of your foot? How are you going to manage if you you drop your gel, you miss a hydration station, and it's a warm day? You get a side stitch. I went through a real nasty stretch of not only getting a side stitch, but fearing getting a side stitch, because I had a side stitch screw up one of my marathons in retrospect, in the worst way I've ever had with any marathon in the nearly 15 years that I've been running marathons. And we'll talk about DNFs in a second, our own personal stories. And that became this haunting thing for me for a couple of years afterwards. What if I get this mysterious side stitch? What do I do? Is that, and then kind of in the back of your mind thinking well, it's going to screw up my race, so why am I going to want to do that race then? Which is a very dangerous feedback loop. And I'll give credit to your coach, Alex, your coach, John LaFranco. He and I were chatting about DNFs just this morning. I was mentioning to him in a text thread, I was mentioning to him that we were going to talk DNFs. And he mentioned, he was like, DNFs are super dangerous because there's some brain science behind this. Just like there's brain science behind visualization and how you can kind of create these neural pathways when you visualize that will help you with success and help you with your outcome in a positive way. There's also some brain science, the same brain science, where you're basically, you start DNFing and you create these sort of the neural pathways that connect from this is hard to, oh, you can just stop. if you start kind of reinforcing those pathways, it just becomes all the more easier for you to step off the course when it gets hard. And it will get hard in every race. So you got to accept it's going to get hard. Okay. Let's talk about, let's have, it's a safe space, guys.
We're going to share.
We're going to share. Boy. Let's share some personal stories. I'll go first.
Okay, I was gonna say who's gonna volunteer to go first. Michael, take it away.
I don't know. I don't know if we should do this. Is it okay if we? Is it okay if we scrap the podcast?
You want to?
I think I sounded weird. Yeah. Why don't we just take it up in a couple months? No one will know if we end it now.
You know what? I agree with you, Alex. I hesitated a couple of times. I kind of went on too long at one point there. It wasn't, like you talk for more than like weird. A minute. People don't.
We're gonna jump ship.
Let's cancel the pod. We'll do this. Let's do this in the new year.
What are you guys up to in November?
Well, I'll have finished a marathon. I'll be recovering. Yeah, that sounds good. Hopefully, I'll have finished it and not stepped off the course.
Okay.
Cool. No.
Okay, bye.
Speaking of Chicago.
No one wants to talk about our horror stories. I know.
Chicago, 2010.
Alex was 5.
Alex was a glimmer in his parents' eye.
I was wearing diaper cream.
Alex remembers the diaper cream. He was smearing it on his feet for some reason. And Katelyn and I were both.
I was 15.
Katelyn and I were both 57 years old. No, 2010, my second marathon, my debut marathon. Debut is such an asshole thing to say. My debut marathon. I'm a recreational runner. My first marathon went really well. I was like, this marathon business, like I'm born to do this. I just slight negative split, totally nailed everything. I had a really good plan going in retrospect. I realized that like I had a healthy fear of the marathon and it mostly went really well. Although there were some hard patches and there were some little mistakes and some learnings, as they say. Second marathon went in way too confident. Major marathon was way in over my head. Big time-based goal. Didn't really think about B's and C's. I'm just like, there's only one goal, and it's to kick ass. It's like I'm going in, and I'm like, I'm running 248. I'm not even going sub 250. I'm running 248, and it's just like I'm just gonna smoke this thing, and it's gonna be like 248. That's my starting point. Maybe even faster. And I had run a 251 and change as my first marathon, so I was like, hey, this is a nice step under 250. And wow, major marathons are overwhelming. There's like all this stuff I didn't prepare for, even though I was told about it. Like just the fact that you got to get into a corral like an hour and a half before the race, at least an hour and a half, that there's 40,000 of your closest running friends are joining you on the course that day, that there's a whole bunch of people that are as good and way better than you all around you, that this is not your local marathon. And I think for somebody who is starting to feel themselves a little bit, as I was at that point, ego was playing a big role in running at that point. It was like, oh, okay, just like cut me back quite a bit. And got a wicked side stitch at about 28K that I now in retrospect recognize as, I'm sure if you had like advanced physiological metrics that we now have with the watches, like, and I wasn't running with like at the time it would be like a chest strap heart rate monitor. I never have worn a chest strap. So I didn't know what my heart rate was, but I'm sure it was very high. I'm sure it was uncomfortably high. I'm sure I was feeling the stress and the anxiety of the race. Probably wasn't prepared for it. And I was prepared for it in terms of like training, but not in terms of race day prep. And I was probably running a little faster than 248 pace as well. I could go back and look at what my split was at half. And I was just in over my head. And I got a nasty side stitch that was due to all of that and just couldn't shake it for the rest of the race. And I started walking at, I think, around 28K. Did not DNF. And I'm happy I didn't. but I went for a little 14K walk in the city of Chicago. And
oh my goodness.
yeah, and walked in like a 3.5 hour marathon because I was like, I am not DNFing. I am not quitting. However, I was being very stubborn. I'm happy I didn't DNF. I'm happy I finished it.
Well,
But
you
it was
weren't injured, right?
I was not injured.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
I did try to start running on several occasions, and just like this wicked side stitch kept coming back. And I think it's the side stitch is a physiological and psychological feedback loop that happens within your body. I know it's still like one of these elusive and mysterious ailments in running.
Mm-hmm.
But I would say
Yep.
it comes down to a combination of what's going on between your ears and also what's going on physiologically in your core and with your breathing. You're just not regulated, you're not calm, and it takes a long time to kind of like self-regulate, and like in some cases hours, so it kind of screws your race. But I didn't have a B goal, I didn't have a C goal to rely on, I didn't have a way to back off, I didn't have a way to reset, I didn't have a way to kind of rebound from that. And that was a huge learning moment for me, and I was like, I'm never doing that again. So I've thought about this. I have only ever DNF'd once in any running event ever. And it was not that race, but that race was sort of like a quasi DNF. My only DNF ever was, and I think this is actually something we didn't mention before, it's a rare reason to DNF. 2012 New York City Marathon famously never happened. Hurricane Sandy hit. The race was canceled on the Friday night of the weekend of the marathon.
Oh my gosh.
So me and my running pals get into a car and drive to the closest marathon that's happening that Sunday. We go to Hamilton, Ontario, back across the border, and run this pokey little marathon in Hamilton, Ontario that, we had not prepared for it. We didn't know you kind of didn't really know what like you're like trying to figure out what the course is like. It's like a very different experience than New York. And I don't mean to disparage the people that run the Hamilton Marathon, but it was just not very well organized. And I got sent off course.
Oh, that stinks.
And then I was supposed to run a loop 3 times, and I only ran it twice, and they told me to go in the direction toward the finish line.
Oh no.
Because I guess they thought I was winning the race or something. And I was just like, okay. And that was at like 30 something kilometers. And I get to the finish line and I look at my watch, and the finish line, thank God, the finish line is like a U-turn. So you're running along on like a bike path. If you ever run on a bike path in a race, your race is kind of a shitty race. If you're running a bike path, just going to say that.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a U-turn to go into the finishing chute. And just before I hit the U-turn, I look at my watch. I'm like, why is it saying 39K? What the hell is going on? How am I 3 kilometers short? And then I realized like I didn't do the loop the 3rd time. And then and that's on me. That's on me. I should have been more methodical. I should have spent more time researching the race. And I sat under a tree at that hairpin turn and just watched everyone run by. And I didn't finish the race because I was like, it's not right to cross the finish line and quote unquote win for a couple of minutes until the real winner comes in. And it's also kind of an embarrassing thing. And also just, I'm not going to jog back 5 kilometers and run the loop again and then run back in and run like 50K on the day. That's stupid as well. So I just DNF'd. And that's the only time I've ever DNF'd at any distance. There's my sad story, guys. I would say that's the right thing to do. I feel in retrospect like it was the right thing to do because you can't finish in that circumstance. No. And it's not really stepping off the course. Anyway.
Yeah. That's the one I didn't think of. If you cut the course and you realize it as you come towards the finish line, you step off course. That's a worthwhile and respectful DNF.
That is, Michael.
Inadvertent cheating is a DNF, is an option for DNFing. Yes.
Yes. That's a good reason. That's a good reason for a DNF. See, so you don't have a bad reason. You don't have a bad DNF there, Michael.
I have a pretty clean sheet overall.
Yeah.
I feel pretty good about the record. I don't think I'm forgetting anything. Like I kind of racked my brain for this because I really do want this to be a scenario for those who are listening to kind of like benefit from our mistakes as well.
Totally. Yeah.
So I don't know. Who's next?
I'll go next.
Okay, Alex.
I'll go next. I'll spare Katelyn for now. I had a streak of DNFs back in 2014, and there are two layers to this story, and I'll try to wrap it up quickly enough. The first layer was I had a huge ego, so I'm coming out of high school. I'm from a very small province in Canada, so rarely ever lost a race. I wasn't sure what losing a race felt like. Get into university.
The king of Prince Edward Island, Alex Sear.
And then, I go to university one province over, and then all of a sudden there are 7 guys who live with me who are faster than I am. And so I'm telling myself I should be at this particular speed. And so I start my races at a speed that I can't handle. And so midway through, 3/4 of the way through, I have nothing left and I drop out. It was like, hold on to a pace. It's terrible advice. Hold on to a pace you cannot manage until your legs can't go anymore. So I was trying to figure that out throughout most of my first year. I think this resulted in 4 separate DNFs inside of my first college year.
Wow.
Something else happened at the end of that year. I got a medical test done. It turns out I had really low iron, probably from the terrible university cafeteria food that we ate a lot of, but maybe wasn't all that nutritious. I don't know. And so the other thing at play was that because my iron was low, that made it harder to do any type of aerobic activity. And so there was probably also a physiological thing that things that I was able to do have become a whole lot harder. But it's my fault because midway through, when I started feeling that things were harder, I should have asked myself the questions of maybe something medically is wrong, maybe my training's wrong, maybe something's going on, instead of just blindly chasing a pace that I clearly couldn't handle. But anyway, I get out of this first year, and luckily I think I understood for myself that every time that I stopped racing, every time that I DNF'd, it would make the next DNF easier. To the point where I would get into a race being like, well, I might finish it, but also I might not. The self-talk in my head was all around will I manage to finish this race, as opposed to okay, 5K and you'll feel like this, and 8K and you'll feel like this. It was not good self-talk. It was more so, we'll see. There's not much confidence there. And so then I gave myself the challenge. And if anyone ever gets caught in a DNF loop, and they do happen, right? DNF loops happen. If you get caught in a DNF loop, I encourage you to do this challenge. Take out a folder, piece of paper, pen and paper. That's what I did. I had an old Hilroy folder, and I wrote down the first or the next race that I was doing. It was an 8K time trial. It was the time trial race to make the cross country team. It's a time trial, September 1st, Antigonish, Nova Scotia, 8K. And then when I finished the race, I put in my time. That was one. It was 1 point.
Okay.
Second race was another race in Nova Scotia. Same thing. Wrote down the distance, wrote down the name of the race, wrote down the time. That's 2 points. And I tried to make the streak go as long as I could. And that was the only goal. It was how long could you make this non-DNF streak? Mm-hmm. And then the talking changed when I got into the race. It's okay, the primary goal is finish this race. Finish this race. And don't finish it making an excuse. As far as I'm concerned, saying that you're going to tempo it, or giving up midway and just walking it through, the Michael Chicago, that doesn't count. Basically, you're telling yourself, I can't give up on myself during this race. Mm-hmm. And the more races like that you stack, the tougher you become. It's literally that simple. It's literally that simple. And I was lucky to not have any major injuries after that for many years. So there was never a point where I was oh, maybe I have a stress fracture. Maybe I should stop racing right now. That didn't happen. Obviously, that's a different scenario. But my streak went on up until COVID. And I don't know where my folder is. I should probably take it out again. Luckily, the DNFs are not an issue anymore. But if I were to fall in a cycle like that again, that's the first thing I would do. I'd go back and say, okay, here is a scroll that shows you every time you succeeded. This is how tough you are. You're 5 races in, no DNF. Keep going, keep going.
Yeah. And I would say even within each race, it got me thinking about something that Katelyn and I talked a little bit about with the marathon goal thing last week, is even within each race, prepare yourself for these tough moments. And these are boxes you almost want to check off within a race where you're like, I don't know, you feel like if you're running with a group of people and then you fall off the group a little bit, which is something that does happen and is psychologically like kind of a really a tough thing to surmount as a runner of any level, or you get passed in the second half of a race. Have yourself mentally prepared for that. Think about that in advance. Ask yourself the tough question of what am I going to do when that happens? And when it is happening, you can tell yourself like, this is a great opportunity for me right now to work on this, you know, to work on how I'm going to handle this, because this is a situation. This is real. This is happening right now. I'm having someone passing me in a race. How do I respond to this? You know? And you can try a bunch of different strategies. Maybe you try to like hang on with them for as long as you can, or maybe you try to just like forget about them and reset and then focus on your goal, on what you're trying to do, because everyone's running their own race, right? So, especially if you're running like a big, huge, major marathon, prepare yourself for being passed in the last 10 kilometers of the race. Because even if you're running really, really well, someone may be running better than you. And they'll just kind of come gliding by you. And you're just like, oh man, I wish I was floating along like them. But yeah, like create these sort of like these checklists where you're like, okay, I'm going to turn these negatives into positives. That's a really good, I love your list. You're like,
yeah, me too.
Sort of like a race streak strategy. That's good. It's like rewarding yourself where you're like, the goal here is to finish. The goal here is to actually follow through. I think that's really good.
Yeah, I remember finishing track meets and being like, all right, I did a 1,500, a 3,000 meters, a 4x8, boom, boom, boom. That's
and
3 entries on the list.
Yeah.
It counts as 3. So
right.
the shorter race, the better.
Yeah,
he's
that's
running
a great
800.
idea.
He's doing hurdles.
4x1.
It's like, wow. Katelyn. I feel like Katelyn's got some good ones because Katelyn's done ultras where things can get real ugly.
Yeah, things can get pretty ugly. I am not a DNFer. I'm not a person who is gonna I actually feel as though maybe a stubborn runner, I think someone who's a little more stubborn, and that's also not great in some circumstances. But I feel like for the most part, my stubbornness and wanting to finish the races helps, because 9 times out of 10, you're not thinking about DNFing because you had an accident or you're actually seriously injured. It's, more of that mental game that Alex is telling us about, or about not being able to hold on or not wanting to do a time less than you're going to do. So both, I have only DNF'd twice, and I'm going to try to get through my stories as quickly as possible, but I think they're both very important because they're extremely different. So I've only had a DNF twice. They've both been in ultra marathons, where Michael was saying, you get more of a chance to have things go wrong because they're just so long. So one of them, and different morals to the story here. The first one, the moral of the story is always listen to your coach. So I hope my athletes are listening. Wink. When I just started running ultras, I had just got off of my first 100-miler, and I ran Vermont, and I was psyched. I was super pumped because I was like, wow, I finished a 100-miler. I felt great. I did, a sub 24 hour, which is like super cool for a first 100-miler. I just was on top of the world. I had the best time. Everything hurt, of course. Don't think it was like a breeze or anything like that. I had moments. I actually wanted to DNF at mile 96 in the Vermont 100 because I felt so bad. And I was just kind of like telling myself, I can't. I want, the running club, if they're following me, I need to get through that finish line, whatever motivation you can get in races like that. I was like, there's no way I can stop. I've got 6 miles to go. So, but I had come off of that 100-miler, super psyched, pumped up, felt amazing. And, 6 weeks later, this is like 13 years ago. We're talking a long time ago when I was an immature runner. And I said to my coach when I got back, hey, one of my favorite races is next month. It's a 62K, and it's called La Lapa Roja. And it's, a beautiful race out by the beach, mountainous, gorgeous views. I had run it like 3 years in a row before. And I said, hey, can I just go and run it? You have a good time? He said, no. He said, you're not going to be recovered. I really don't think it's a good idea. It's only 4 weeks after your 100-miler. We usually put 3-4 months in between races. It's your first one. It's a terrible idea. No. And I said, okay. Went to the race with those in the running club who were running it and decided to run the race. Like, did something that I would absolutely flip if one of my athletes did something like that. So ran the race. No, began to run the race, got to an aid station at kilometer 42. And they looked at me and they said, the thing is that I don't even really remember. That's how bad it was. So I guess I was completely dehydrated. I was probably dealing with some sort of like a heat exhaustion that I mentioned earlier in the podcast. And they basically took me off the course because they said that I was like speaking gibberish and mumbling about something and didn't really know where I was. I mean, this was a mix between probably not being recovered and not taking care of my hydration and just thinking like I could just go to that race and run 62K, you know, because it wasn't 160K. Like there's 100 kilometers less than what I ran in my race and just thought that I could, you know, get through it. And they pulled me off the course so nicely. One of the race directors who was there said, you know, Katelyn, I think that maybe you should stay here. You know, obviously they weren't going to let me. They weren't going to let me go back out there, but I had to.
You're like, okay. Maybe I'll just I'll sit down for a second.
Yeah, just a sec. You know, it's like 100 degrees Fahrenheit, like 95% humidity in this area by the beach in Costa Rica. And I'm just like wandering around. I don't even know how I made it there. So they said, you know, Katelyn, I think it's a good idea that you stop. And, you know, this is an immature runner. I should have listened to my coach. You know, that was a very tough lesson to take. But that DNF was not my decision. So it didn't seem as hard as my second DNF years later, which was, you know, a mature Katelyn running and a decision that I had to make. Like that DNF, I said, yeah, I made a really bad decision. You know, my coach is super disappointed in me. I'm super disappointed in myself. I never wanted to DNF in my life and I made a bad choice. And so this is just, you know, I'm telling this story just so you guys listen to your coaches. Please follow your training plans and recover. The second one was many years later. It was like my third 100 miler. About 4 or 5, 6 years later. I can't remember right now. I was running the Bear 100 and the race was going really, really well for me. I was having a great time. I was about to pick up my pacer in kilometer 100. I had 60 kilometers to go. I was cruising. I was passing people. I was psyched. They were, you know, cheering me on in the aid stations like, hi, you're the third woman who passed by. And I'm like, oh my God, I got to keep this up. I got to, you know, run fast. I got to keep my pace. I feel amazing. And just out of the blue, at kilometer like 110, 120, I started feeling this sharp pain in my knee. And I said, oh no, wait a second. This isn't muscle soreness. This isn't like I'm, you know, bonked. There's like a sharp pain in my knee. So I kept going for a little while. And little by little, my leg would not bend. So little by little, I was starting to walk with one leg completely straight. So as Alex mentioned, you know, changing your gait to this extreme is not a good sign. So I was literally hobbling around kilometer 120. And I spent about 10, 20 kilometers deciding what I was going to do. Like it was obviously, I had to get out. I had to get to the next aid station. You're in the middle of nowhere. And I was hobbling along and walking with a straight leg, people passing me all over the place. And I was like, okay, I could walk like Michael did. I could walk the rest of this race. I could walk 40 kilometers. I could take a ton of time. But am I going to see, like, is this a serious injury? I can't bend my knee. So I said, you know, am I going to continue and risk being out of the game, not for a couple weeks or a month, but risk 6 months because I injured myself because I don't know what's going on. I'm not a physical therapist or a doctor. I can't gauge what's going on here. And so it was, and I may sound a little exaggerated. I don't know if I'm not exaggerating how I felt, but you guys might think that it's like, wow, she takes this way too seriously.
No. All I'm thinking is I'm really happy that I went before you because my little story of dropping out of a race because I ran a 64-second lap instead of a 62 sounds preposterous now.
Oh, Alex, no, but it's just it's just when I like bawled my eyes out for about every night for 2 weeks. I just cried at the disappointment that I wasn't able to finish the race. And just, it really, really hit me extremely hard. And so the reason why I wanted to share both stories quickly is that, you know, the first one, decision was made for me. And it was kind of like, okay, move on. The second one, because I had to make that decision, was devastating. It was absolutely devastating. And I learned from both. And the one about being devastated for 2 weeks, I have to say, that wasn't worth it. I wasn't worth beating myself up day after day, night after night, going to bed, like weeping because I had failed. And so I think that going back to the perfectionist syndrome, Michael, and I just think that if I give our listeners, takeaways from my experiences, other than listen to your coach, I've said it for the 5th time. Don't get so hung up on it. Yes, a DNF is not something that you want to do. A DNF is not fun. You want to try to avoid it at all costs. But if you have to, also don't completely beat yourself up over it, because it's life. It happens. We're human and we can't control everything. And so just kind of remember why you run, that you're able to run, get back at it and choose your next goal. And, don't let it bring you so far down into a deep, dark hole as it brought me, because you just there's always going to be another race.
I think that's a perfect place to close this conversation off on the DNF. Let's crawl out of the deep, dark place.
Yeah.
And thank you for sharing, everyone. Katelyn, I know this is on my mind. It's like, did you have a serious knee injury? Were you okay?
That's I think why I cried every day for 2 weeks after, because I think it ended up being like, I guess in the end, could your, IT band be so incredibly tight, or some, the muscles that I wasn't able to bend the knee, but I tried to stretch it out on the course, tried to get back, and it could run another couple kilometers. And then again, in the beginning. And so I was really happy that it wasn't a serious injury, because I was able to continue running. But it also that's what killed me for so long, is that I said, well, if I had continued, but
right.
If you had continued, would it have gotten worse to the point where you would have had a serious injury? And so, I didn't feel great. It's not like I could have said, I'm going to take another race in a couple of weeks and try it again. No. I needed to recoup, but it wasn't like months and months out of the game, luckily.
Can you snap an IT band?
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
Question mark. Next time on the Marathon Handbook podcast. I feel like I've tried at times, but okay, guys. Excellent job. I think we're pretty thorough with the DNF. If you don't subscribe to our newsletter, please do so. 5 days a week. Katelyn is one of the maestros of the newsletter. Monday to Friday, it goes out at 5:05 Eastern time, where you can find all sorts of original content, including links to Mr. Alex Sears' fantastic YouTube creations, including his most recent one, which is that he took down the Strava segment in front of Drake's house, mansion, crib, monstrosity.
It's
Whatever
called
you want to call
embassy.
it.
The embassy.
They call it the embassy. And it looks like an embassy.
Yeah, it does. The walls.
Yes. A fortress.
The fortress, yep.
And, we got, with 10 seconds left in this video, I'm going to say, if you have any other suggestions for how to avoid a DNF, add them in the comments below right now. We can even do the pointing down thing that people do. Yeah, add them in the comments right now. And we'll read and respond. And thank you so much for listening and watching. And we'll talk to you next week.